I'm Julie Herman of Jaybird Quilts and Lazy Girl Designs, and welcome back to the Gravity Sew Along. Now that we have cut all of our pieces for month 6, it's time to begin to piece our block. If you have not yet seen the cutting video, I suggest you start there. The link can be found in the caption below. Once you have everything cut, it's time to begin piecing. And I mentioned this in the cutting video for month 6 Ultraviolet, but I will mention it again, that the directions, if you are in the new book, are on pages 22 and 23, and the old book are on 24, 25. This is the only block that changed numbers. We are going to piece triangles to a hexagon, which we have done a couple months ago. So we're simply going to place those on the hexagon, and we can sew those in place. And we're going to piece 2 half hexagons together, and then we're going to do some partial seams. And partial seams can seem a little intimidating if you've never done them before, but they're not that scary. I will walk you through every step of the way. I'm going to begin with the triangles onto my hexagon, and just as I have all the other months, my machine is set to my scant 1/4 inch seam, which is just 1 thread over from 1/4 inch, so that when everything is pressed and open, it will perfectly measure the exact size that we want it to be. So our 2 half hexagons, I still have these attached because I don't want to confuse which pieces are which. So I just have them on the outside so they're kind of out of the way. Or if you're not comfortable with that, you could leave these 2 over here for a moment because you're making matching pairs. So with these, move the pieces back on, whatever works best for you. To put 2 half hexagons together, it's great. They already have the blend points, so we just perfectly line them up, and we can sew them into a nice piece. And then same thing with our B and our C. And you will notice that these are not in the same direction as these. Make sure you're paying attention to your directions on the top of the second page, either page 23 or page 25, because you don't want to do them the wrong way. It won't all fit together to make a diamond block if you don't follow the directions exactly. So go ahead and add your triangles to your center hexagon, your jewels, and then press your seams open as we have for previous months. I've gone ahead and done all of my purple block. So I'm going to lay that out and show you how we do our partial seams. So we're going to start in the center with the hexagon and triangle unit. And we're not laying the whole block out. You can see the picture of the whole block on the first page, but we're going to be on step 4 on the second page, and we're just going to take one piece at a time. So I'm going to leave the EF that has the tags, and I'm going to take the EF that doesn't have the tags, and I'm going to make sure, and this is where I told you things got turned around on the other example, this is not the way that I want it, because this is the E fabric. I want the F fabric to be touching my centerpiece. And I know I don't use pins often. This is one opportunity where I will use pins. And what we are going to do is I'm going to show you how we arrange this, and then we are going to sew part of the seam. That's where the term partial seam comes from. So I'm lining this up here so that this lines up perfectly. Just take a pin. And then here you don't have as clear of an idea of where this is, and that's okay because you're only sewing to about here anyway. But if you're wondering, the seam allowance you pressed open here, this edge of the seam allowance is going to lie directly on top of the piece. It's kind of hard to see. Let's see, can I? But if you drew an imaginary line all the way through, that would line up. And what I like to do sometimes here is I like to actually put, and I didn't show this in the book, but I will explain it to you. I like to put 2 pins in, and if I have a red one, I like to usually use a red one, in an X, and that's kind of my visual cue, stop, because I don't want to sew the length of the seam. If you do, you're going to have to unpick some of your stitches. And I have 2 options now. I can flip this over and sew from this side, or I can begin about halfway down the seam and sew to the end. I'm going to choose to sew from the other side. If you do that, just make sure that you're not sewing over pins. I made sure that my pins are far enough away from my seam allowance that I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to sew a little bit past this intersection, just a few stitches. And I'm not back stitching here. I am just going to stop, and let me show you what I do. Let's move these yellow ones out of the way. Okay, I'm gonna put my foot up, go back onto my leader ender. It's really important that you go back onto something and don't end up with a nest of threads. So I want to pull that off. I'm going to take out these pins. And this is what your piece should look like. This matches the diagram at the end of step 4. And then our next piece is going to go on the right here. So we do need to press this seam. And this is a perfect opportunity to use a seam roller. You also could turn your iron on. I like to just press a little bit. The other advantage of using your seam roller here is you don't actually want to press the whole length of the seam right now because you're going to have to finish sewing it. So you really don't want to press this whole seam open. So I'm going to flip this back up. And the next piece I need is BC. So I'm going to find my BC. And it looks like I want B up and C down. So that's what that looks like right there. And now this length will match this. So what I'm going to do is, this is my first alignment point, is right here. And then over here, this and this are going to overlap so that when you sew this seam, the points are going to line up. So if you look in our seam allowance over here and over here, you want all of that on top of each other like a little sandwich. Because if you line it up like that, then when you sew your 1/4 inch, it's going to be drastically off, which is not what we want. So you want to make sure that it is nice and lined up properly. And then over here, you're going to have a little triangle that hangs off, and you're going to sew to that valley. If that is confusing to you, you can go ahead and take your hexagon ruler and line it up, and you can cut off that little point. I'm just going to go ahead, line them up, and add one more pin. And now the first one was partial. This one I'm going to sew the length of this piece. I'm going to go nice and slow, pulling on my pins as I go. Never want to sew over my pins, and use my stiletto where necessary to keep things nice and lined up. Make sure I don't flip those seams underneath. And just slow and steady along the piece. Again, pulling out my pins as I go. And nothing else is going to intersect this seam at this point. So if you'd like, you can go ahead and backstitch. It's okay if you don't, but it is also an option. And I'm just going to go back on my scrap again. And let's see what that looks like. So there we go. So now we have added the second one. And let's see. Oh, that looks really good. If it doesn't, you can go ahead and take it out. I don't need to worry about pressing the whole seam at this point. I just need to press the part where I'm going next. So I'm just going to press with my finger and then my seam roller. And I just realized I was actually backwards. I backstitched here. I should have backstitched at the beginning because that's the part that is not getting sewn over. So my mistake on that. So I will correct that on my next one. You want to do the backstitching at the beginning of the seam, not at the end. Okay, so let's lay this back out. And now I need an EF. So I have one more EF. And again, this is where things got reversed. So one EF went on properly before and one went on backwards. So I want to make sure this time that I get it correct. So I'm going to rotate that around, take these tags off, and flip this in place. And again, I don't pin often, but this is one opportunity where I do like to pin. And then here, because we are working with an outer corner, 120 degree, not 60, it just will line up perfectly there. And so this is where I will backstitch at the beginning, not at the end. And as I mentioned, it's okay if you don't backstitch. It's just if you are worried about any part of your block coming undone before you put all of your blocks assembled together after month 9, it's not a bad idea. So again, slow and steady, using my stiletto, pulling pins out as I go. So now I have 3 of them on, and it's time to add my 4th and final. And this is going to go on the same as the other ones. What we want to do though is we want to take this out of the way. We're not ready to work with this yet. So we want to fold this onto the block and just pin it out of our way. And then we can go ahead and sew this to here just as we have done the previous 2. We're going to sew the full length of this seam as well. Okay, so here is where the magic of the partial seam is going to come into play. It enables us to make a special looking block without having any inset or Y seams. We're going to just use our seam roller one last time to press open that last seam, and now flip it back to the right side, and we're going to open this back up, take that pin out, and what we're going to do is we're going to fold this on top of each other and complete that partial seam. It obviously won't fold as well over here because we don't have a full seam, but as long as it folds nice and good so that you'll be able to overlap about 1/2 inch, that's all you need to worry about. So again, I'm going to put a few pins in place, and I like to leave those dog ears. They really actually do help me align my pieces. So you can see that the dog ear from the other piece matches up with the edge here. And so that's where I began my sewing. So I'm going to start here, back stitch, and I'm just going to stitch about 1/2 inch over to lock that in nice and good, and that will complete my block. You want to go nice and slow and make sure you land right in the same place. No need to back stitch, just go over it by about 1/2 inch. Okay, let's take that last pin out, and there we go. Just by using that partial seam technique, we have a beautiful block. And now the last step is going to be to finger press the rest of the seams open and then take it over to the iron to press the entire block. And I will repeat those steps to finish my yellow block as well. Thanks for watching. If this video was helpful for you, be sure to like it, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. Show us your progress on your gravity blocks in our Facebook group. We'd love to see how you're coming along with your quilt. The link to the Facebook group is below. I'll be back here in the next video to show you how to do your cutting for block 7.